together here at the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America here in New York City via video streaming Turkish Channel USA website of Faruk Acar production. Tonight we have a unique group of panelists who are highly educated in their own right and qualified to discuss the topic on how to regain Crimea, Ukraine, a survival of history. But before we begin, I would like to share with everyone, wherever you are, in Crimea, in Kiev, in Turkey, in Russia, in Azerbaijan, all over the world, let us observe a brief moment of silence in memory of our brave Ukrainian soldiers who have died in battle and who continue to die, and for our indigenous Ukrainians, the Crimean Tatars, who are being abducted, who have disappeared, and we don't know their state at all, if they're alive, their families are worried. So if we can just, our panelists, if we can just rise up for a few minutes to observe and honor in memory of everyone. Ukrainian crisis is almost a year old. February 26 will mark the first year of the illegal occupation of Crimea, Ukraine by Russia. While the world was rightfully shocked with the occupation and no one predicted it would take place in the 21st century, but then again, the indigenous Crimean Tatars of Crimea, having had a historical precedence with the first annexation in 1783, the second annexation was in fact only a replay of the first. Imperialist Russia invaded and confiscated the resource-rich indigenous lands of Crimean Tatars while employing brutal suppression. What was their justification then? As noted within historical sources, Tsar stated it was freeing, civilizing the Crimean Tatars by making them part of the civilized Russian culture. When the Crimean Tatars protested against the annexation, then Catherine II insisted that she was saving the Crimean Khanate from misgovernment. Further justifications were made by Prince Grigory Potemkin, who decided that Russia needed its own paradise and Crimea was going to be theirs. What is the origination of this thinking? The United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues at its 11th session opened a special theme. It's known as the Doctrine of Discovery, to precisely address this type of historical frame of mind. The Doctrine of Discovery was in fact a principle of international law dating from the late 15th century, which had its roots in a papal decree issued by Pope Nicholas V in the 15th century that specifically sanctioned and promoted the conquest, colonization, and exploitation of native territories. We forget that this doctrine was a legal construct which established a framework of domination and direct land grab. Imperialist Russia then and Putin's Russian Republic today, influenced by this doctrine in an astonishing justification several months ago, attempted to Jerusalemize claims to Crimea, stating it is sacred to Russians because Vladimir the Great, who Christianized Russia, was baptized in Crimea some 1,000 years ago. What is Putin digging for? Is it a justification on the illegal annexation of Crimea? Is he competing with indigenous Crimean Tatars for authenticity? There, I say, threatened by the indigenous status of the Crimean Tatars of Crimea, Ukraine. A more modern version of justification was given by Medvedev soon after the second occupation, and he regarded Crimea as its privileged interest. Given these comments, the doctrine of discovery exemplifies the enduring impact on indigenous peoples leading up until the 21st century. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples specifically cites in Articles 28 and 37 the issues of colonization, domination, repression, and the right to redress for past conquests. On my visits to Crimea prior to the occupation, a Crimean Tatar professor, who I shall not name, made a brilliant assessment on the tenacity of the Crimean Tatar people to survive despite the attempts to colonize, occupy, and deport an entire people from their homeland, who stated the following: Crimean Tatar are a people who have the ability to reinvent, renew, and reposition themselves in order that we survive. This also speaks to the violent way an entire Crimean Tatar population was awakened by Soviet Russian soldiers on May 18, 1944, loaded on trucks, taken to the nearest train station, and loaded into cattle train wagons full of lice and debris, and brutally deported to Central Asia, the Urals, and Siberia, whereby 46% of them died en route. An approximate figure is about 100,000. A month later, in 1944, in June, Russian goal was pursued, Crimea without Crimean Tatars, damaging to self-recognition within the Crimean Tatar indigenous identity. The Soviet Russian authorities decreed that Crimean Tatars could no longer call themselves Crimean. In passports and in other official documents, people had to refer to themselves as Tatars formerly living in Crimea. During Perestroika in the 1980s, Crimean Tatars were allowed to return under the leadership of Mustafa Cemilev. 300,000 approximately returned, and nearly 30 years of Ukrainian independence from Soviet Russia. The indigenous Crimean Tatars begin to develop themselves, their new structures, and of course, one of the most critical, important institution is the Crimean Tatar Mejlis, a self-governing body, and the Kurultai, the Indigenous Congress, now today find themselves abruptly shut down after the Russian occupation. Mustafa Cemilev, leader of the Crimean Tatar people and member of the Ukrainian parliament, has been deported from Crimea by Russian authorities without legal justification for 5 years. Similarly, same with the chairman of the Mejlis, Refat Chibarov, and Ismet Yüksel, who is the chief coordinator of the Crimea News Agency. In addition to that, just recent after the occupation, the community of Crimean Tatars were not allowed to commemorate the deportation of May 18, 1944. The expression of the Crimean Tatars, this open civil position that disapproves the occupation, has become their biggest dilemma. The authorities target the Mejlis. The authorities target Crimean Tatar mass media, including ATR. There are enforced disappearances, causing grave concern. To date, there are 150 Crimean Tatars who are missing. In addition to that, the combination of all these elements, these tragic experiences, remind the Crimean Tatars once again of the May 18, 1944 situation. So as the battle for Crimea is not over, the Crimean Tatars will be a critical asset for United States and Europe, and definitely Ukraine, in regaining Crimea back. One of the crucial narratives is the indisputable fact that the Crimean Tatars are the indigenous people of Crimea. And I want to, after giving this extensive introduction, I hope I did not bore everybody here. but I did want to go to our first. I have sitting next to right on me is Andrei Dobryansky, a executive board member of the Ukrainian Congress of Committee and a manager at the Rubin Museum of Art. And he's a frequent commentator on CNN, Al Jazeera, and MSNBC. And almost to the end, Dr. Walter Zarisky, Executive Director of the Center for the U.S.-Ukrainian Relations at Columbia University. And next to him, Ali Chinar, President of the Global Policy Institute and former President of the Turkish-American Federation. And I have Ms. Habiba Altov, who is right next to Cihan Khan. She is a renowned writer and a publisher of the Best magazine, and she has anointed the term Anatolian Tigers, and she is the founder of Yatash Furniture and Bedding Corporation in Turkey, and she has been frequently interviewed by the Financial Times as an entrepreneur. She's a graduate of the University of Ortadoğu University in Turkey, Master's in Gender Studies. So I wanted to do a quick introduction, and at the end we have a representative from the Ukrainian mission to the United Nations, Alex Zomi, as guest, who is also a Crimean Tatar, Habiba Altov. I want to bring her into this conversation because it's in line with Cihan's sentiments, and that is the Tatars of Crimea, needless to say, went through ethnic cleansing, and that in terms of contextualizing history, this currently this annexation, re-invasion that we are experiencing right now on why history matters, are we not even in the past? That here, the past was the invasion, but now today, the past has become today. So there is an irony here, and so I wanted you to, perhaps as a Crimean Tatar, just indicate to us why history matters for the indigenous Crimean Tatars from your perspective.
Yes, so history matters. Now I never think that I will think this way. You know, I think my age is becoming to be part of the history.
No, absolutely not.
You know, and yes, this location, this annexation, all this sorrow, this pain that my parents went through, I experienced their feelings with them because I happen to be the oldest sister in my family, and then we have been relocated from one country to another, and then so we stayed some time in Turkey, and then my parents moved to United States. But through all those times, while readjusting themselves in the present situation, but they always remembering the Crimea, their homeland, their country, and there was always a sorrow that I experienced with them. But like Cihan said, the pain doesn't solve the problem. So we have to find some positive, some ethic values. We have to find something else in order to relieve the pain, to survive, because pain doesn't take you anywhere. But this doesn't mean that they are feelingless.
Yes, There is empathy.
There is an empathy, and so that's what I learned from my parents. Whatever, in what conflict, whatever the break point that we were going through in our life, they always find some light somewhere. This was my main virtues, the values that I learned from my parents.
And despite the experience of Mr. Portier, I mean, just think about it, on May 18, 1944, every Crimean Tatar experienced the same tragic experience. So, and to be so resolute, to be so, still have a positive outlook, and not be, as Cihan reiterated earlier, and not become a victim of our tragedy, I think is the key for surviving history by the Crimean Tatars. Because when we, I just want to just add a personal anecdote here if I can. Habiba Altop is my sister here, and today is her birthday. So it's a very momentous occasion that you are here. But so we are always reminiscing the experience of our parents, and we were always surprised to see how positive and how happy he was. We didn't understand that he went through this tragic deportation. Isn't that remarkable? It's just absolutely amazing.
Yes, I always remember my father singing when he comes home.
Yes.
And this took me all my life, and I still remember, when I remember, my nose burns.
Yes.
And so when he, time to time, he shared his experience, his life stories with me, but his advice always just educate yourself, be a educated person, be global, universal, and then you have to be universal first and educated first in order to solve your territorial problems. And then that is the main goal in our life, and that's what we always hear from my father. But when Ayla told me that she has this symposium, I got little nervous, I got very excited, I was very happy, but I was at the same time little sad, and because like Cihan said, while you are treating yourself, there are some pain that we are going through, and Ayla said to me that how we can regain the Crimea. And yes, this is a very strong statement.
Yes.
Who am I? But at least what I can say is, like today, since it is my birthday, to my parents, because when they were sharing their stories with me, those times when you are young, you just hear them, and then most of the time you don't give the weight for the importance, the heaviness for the messages. But when you grow older, and now I say to myself, and I promise myself, since I didn't give, I felt it, enough attention when they were sharing those experience with me, now maybe it is time, since I feel this way, that I should extend myself and do whatever I can that is possible. Maybe that's maybe that's why I am here today. I'm becoming
absolutely.
a little
I mean, there's a
emotional.
parallel experience here, because under Ukraine, after the fall of Soviets, and Ukraine has won its independence, and we were beginning to rebuild our lives. Ukraine was free and independent. The fall of communism occurred, so we were just beginning to self-heal. And so in that respect, we thought the past was the past. but the second invasion has brought the past to the current. So in that respect, we, second generation, as well as with Cihan, the third generation, we are living our parents' past in a sort of way. But of course, the Crimean Tatars are living 1944, but in a different context. Why is Ukraine in the dire situation it's in today?
Thank you, Ayla. Thank you for this wonderful
Thank you for joining us.
introduction. Very emotional.
Yes, absolutely. We are an emotional people.
And the situation is great and alarming. So, first of all, I'm a representative of the government of Ukraine, and I'd like to bring an international aspect into our conversation. First of all, we have to be very clear about what has happened in Ukraine with regard to Crimea and what is happening now in the eastern part of our country. We have to be very clear that all those events constitute an act of aggression, an act of foreign aggression against the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Ukraine as a sovereign country, one of the founding members of the United Nations. I brought a resolution from the General Assembly dated November 1974, entitled The Definition of Aggression. And I'm going to read out a few paragraphs from the definition, which will sound very familiar to you. So, what the General Assembly understands under the crime of aggression is the use of armed forces of one state which are within the territory of another state with the agreement of the receiving state, in contravention of the conditions provided for in the agreement, or any extension of their presence in such territory beyond the termination of the agreement. So this is exactly what happened in Crimea. Russian Black Sea Fleet was stationed there according to the bilateral agreement, and then at a certain point, when the decision was taken by authorities, all the troops went beyond their location, and the armed forces of the Russian Federation were used in order to block the Ukrainian military bases and ultimately to contribute to the occupation. And that was eventually admitted by the leadership of the Russian Federation. So, and another point is more pertinent to what is happening on the eastern part of Ukraine. So the General Assembly stated that aggression is sending by or on behalf of a state of armed bands, groups, irregulars, or mercenaries which carry out acts of armed force against another state of such gravity as to amount to the acts listed above, in the resolution, or his substantial involvement therein. So this is what happened on the eastern part of Ukraine. That's another manifestation of aggression. And having said that, having identified the actions against Ukraine as an act of aggression, I'd like to elaborate more on on measures that can be done to counteract this aggression.
Yes.
First of all, according to the United Nations Charter, in case of aggression, in case of foreign aggression, member states is entitled to defend itself by means that are consistent with the international law enshrined in the United Nations Charter. So Ukraine is fully entitled to defend itself. But we also have to mention that the international community is by our side. As Ayla absolutely rightly pointed out, on the 27th of March, right after the referendum, so-called referendum, the General Assembly adopted a resolution on the territorial integrity of Ukraine, which reads that General Assembly underscores that the referendum held in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol on the 16th of March 2014, having no validity, cannot form the basis for any alteration of the status of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea or the city of Sevastopol. So, proceeding from that, it has to be noted that Crimea has not been annexed by the Russian Federation. It's an attempted annexation.
Yes.
Because the world has not recognized. And what Crimea is now is a territory of Ukraine temporarily occupied by a foreign power.
Yes, absolutely. And yes, thank you very much, Alex, for that. And I'm wondering that given this highlight of aggression towards Ukraine by Russia, is that Russia is more needy than Ukraine. Here we have Ukraine who wants to vie for independence, but Russia is clinging on. So in terms of defining who is the strength here, the mere fact, I'm not certain, but Russia has 180,000 nuclear warheads that's circulating around its territory. And so the issue is here, who is more strong? I mean, if Russia had the strength with the nuclear heads, why is Russia intimidated with Ukraine's independence? It is an irony, in fact. I thank you so very much for those statements, and I've noted them as well. And if you can please add a few more, I would really appreciate it.
Yeah, I have to. Yeah, thank you. That's a good point. Very interesting and a wonderful point. Ukrainians are optimistic about their future. That's a fact. It's not that we're suppressed. On the contrary, this foreign aggression, this unfortunate situation, helped us unify. We have a very complicated history, very difficult history, I would say. Ukrainians lived for centuries under different rules, so there are things that to overcome for us as Ukrainians, and this external situation has shown how much we have unified during these years of independence gained back in 1981. And another thing that I wanted to add is that we don't believe that there is a military solution. Russia is definitely a nuclear power, and we're realistic about whom we're dealing with. And as our leadership of the country has many times stated, that we do not believe that the military solution is the way to resolve the conflict. We believe that there is a diplomatic solution, political solution, that will help not only Ukrainians to persevere and overcome the conflict, but also Russia. We want the win-win solution. We don't want to humiliate Russia or punish Russia. We just humbly but firmly defeat our independence and seeking for solution mutually benefiting Russia. We want a democratic Russia. We want a good neighbor country, and we want to build our relationship with Russia based on mutual respect, not on antagonism. That's something I wanted to add.
And it seems to be difficult for Russia to do that. I
was about to
Yes, please, Walter, chime in. I would like you to chime in.
Well, I am going to chime in, because I think one of the things that we have to take into consideration, I wanted to correct something, because you had said executive director of the Center for U.S.-Ukrainian Relations at Columbia University. We have been affiliated with Columbia we're a standalone organization that has been affiliated with Columbia. We've done the Historical Encounters series for the last 10 years with both Columbia and NYU, where I taught for 30 years. What's interesting about this, and it was something that was mentioned 2 years ago by my good friend Mark Von Hagen, who at some point before he moved to Arizona State was at Columbia, and we did a series of conferences. We came to a certain discovery, and if that discovery isn't explored at some point, we'll all be in trouble. In fact, all humanity is going to be in trouble. For a long time, and Mark brought this up at our Holodomor conference, and I want to say, when I listened to Suran, and I listened to the earlier tragedies and the earlier deportations, and the sort of murderous situation that the Tatars had faced throughout their history, starting with 1783, very much like ours. With 1775, we lose Zaporizhia and so on and so forth, and off we go, Katerina sharing her wealth with both. One of the things that Von Hagen mentions during the Holodomor thing is something we have to confront. The whole world has to confront this, is that for nearly the 20th century, Russia often got away with the word imperialism because imperialism was defined and marked admittedly from the left rather than the right. This was not a right-winger doing this. But he, at the Holodomor thing, came up with the idea of this, that Russia had been gotten away with the notion that it couldn't possibly be imperialist because as a socialist country, imperialism was the highest stage of capitalism, and by the time it was a socialist country, it was not doing. So all the nasty little things, including your deportations, our Holodomors, and so on and so forth, were forgiven because they didn't seem to fit the imperial thing. It wasn't the Americans with the American Indians, it wasn't the French with the Algerians, and so on and so forth. Mark actually made a great point, and he said, well, that's not really necessarily so. Imperialism was around in slave-owning times, vidi the Roman Empire. In feudal times, vidi the Holy Roman Empire was a Germanic empire rather than even a Roman empire. It was there during the capitalist period, but it certainly can be there during the socialist period because it might be one ethnic group for absolutely non-economic reasons taking another ethnic group. In fact, this wonderful thing that you've said, the fear of a Khanate, or the fear in our case of a Kuzachka Kevshka Rush, or the reoccurrence of the Kuzachka Duba, the Kuzachki Democratic Hetmanate that we had, or the Orange Revolutions. In other words, and so in some ways, if once we can see that the Russians can be guilty of imperialism, Von Hagen came to the conclusion that he looked at the stuff that was happening with the Holodomor and he said, Russian imperialism was a little bit like French imperialism, where they wanted the territory, but they didn't want the indigenous population.
Yes.
And this is what's frightening about this, and this is frightening to the entire world, and it has to be addressed whether we love peace or thing. Nobody wants war, but we have to be very clear in our head on what's really happening, and that is that if you take that position that you want a territory, whether it be Crimea and free of Crimean Tatars, because I'd heard that, Crimea without the Crimeans, or Ukraine without the Ukrainians.
Yes.
That happens to have a genocidal conclusion, because the solution for that is the final solution.
Yes.
To get rid of the population. Now that can be frightening, because the Ukrainians and the Tatars have gone through this already, in some form or another. I guess there were too many of them, as Stalin once said, for both the Crimeans and the Ukrainians, to get rid of all of them. And so in that case, if that's the case, then we have another kettle of fish, because we know that with the French, the democratic traditions of France kept the French from practicing that in Algeria with the Bedouins. We all have seen the Battle of Algiers.
Yes.
But in the Russian case, except for Kerensky for a couple of months, and that wonderful drunken Russian Democrat called Yeltsin for a couple of years, we don't have a very good tradition out there. And so we really have to look at this and look at the way we saw the world react to when the Serbs were doing what they were doing in the 90s, when they came close in both Bosnia and Kosovo to repeating something that had happened with the Holodomor and with the Holocaust. And this is why this particular thing that's going on right now is very dangerous. Is very dangerous.
I think that's an excellent point that you made. This demographic engineering, the deportation was exactly addressed that issue. So I think today the diaspora community in particular, and also with technology being so advanced, I think hopefully that will not come to any fruition. But the fact that we identify it and we talk about it,
Yes,
and there is narrative generated out there, is definitely something that we need to circulate more often, because we need to address what has happened to us specifically, point by point. And as a matter of fact, Walter, when you were speaking, I came to the realization that Ukraine experienced two genocides. One, Holodomor, the artificial famine of 1932-33, and May 18, 1944 deportation.
Yes. Yes.
Here,
Yes, the
in
Crimean
one-
deportation was exactly
both
that.
Here are
Ethnic
two
cleansing.
genocides.
Genocidal ethnic cleansing.
Which
Yes.
one are we going to address?
Yes. And now we have both of them at the same time, which is
And
very
yes, okay. And now, still with the reoccupation, again, this attempt. Now we have the same experience. Just, I mean, it's a simple, very. A nation has its own identity and its own vision, and so it reminds me of pretty much of a situation between the Azerbaijan and the Turks, which claim they are two different nations but one people, while the Ukrainians and the Russians are a Slavic people, but they are two different nations, two different
Yes.
distinct cultures, two different originations of history, and same with the Turks and Turkey and Azerbaijan. They are two Turks, but they're two distinct nations, and each nation respects its territorial integrity. They love each other and they collaborate with each other, and so in that respect, it's hard for the international community to understand why it does not allow Ukraine to be independent. Are we going to take a few minutes break? And so this is what happens when you're live at this moment. I want to segue to Ali Çınar, who's the president of the global organization here. Ali, I want to ask you directly, I want to pose the question. Ali, you represent the Turkish community, you're in Turkey back and forth, you travel a lot, you're in DC, you advocate, you lobby, and Habiba Altop, I want you to chime in as well after Ali Çınar's response or before, however you like. Mustafa Cemilev said in an interview with the Anadolu Agency not too long ago that Turkey should follow the example of European countries and impose sanctions against Russia. And so this Turkey's position is clear. Turkey supports the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and while Turkey is concerned about the Russian military incursion into the Crimean Peninsula, it is really reluctant to risk facing a military confrontation with Russia. And whether our viewers know it or not, but Turkey is the home to an estimated 5 million citizens of Crimean Tatars. And Turkey, similarly to Russia, has a historical role as the defender of the Slavic peoples. Turkey also has a history of defending the interests of its own ethnic kinship, be it in Russia, be it in Azerbaijan, or be it in Turkmenistan. So my question to you, Ali, is can Ankara's attitude toward Crimea be problematic for Moscow? And my second part of the question, while you're answering the first, you can think about, you know, Turkey and Russia have been historical rivals, and they both focused on the peninsula of Crimea, facing Turkey's northern Black Sea coast. If this is only an if scenario, Crimea falls under Russian control, Moscow would have reliably assured itself Crimea as the diving board into the Mediterranean. Is this not a concern for Turkey?
Yes, thank you, Ayla. Thanks for having me. These are really good questions. First, I'm going to start with the first question. Is Moscow problematic for Turkey? At some point, yes. When we look at the Minister of Foreign Affairs, recently there's a human rights issues in Crimea right now, and there are lots of press releases coming from the Minister of Foreign Affairs. There's a lot of discrimination and targeting the Crimeans in Crimea right now, Crimean Tatars. So there are some biggest issues right now for Turkey, that there's a human rights issue as well as the unification of the Ukraine. And Turkey was always, stand with Ukraine, United States and other allies, that, Ukraine is, Crimea is part of Ukraine, and this has to be stayed that way. Regarding the second question, I mean, Turkey and Russia, when we look at the Ottoman Empire, yes, there was a big wars and problems between two countries, but Turkey is always, stand with the Western for the rights. So if there are issues, Turkey right now, they don't want to take only risk themselves. We always, ally with Ukraine or United States. If there's a bigger issue on Peninsula and others, I think we are going to collaborate with United Nations and United States. So I don't think Turkey is going to position alone, partner with the other coalition partners. But what we are trying to do is, right now, when I talk with the, and maybe Andrew knows, when we talk with the senators, I closely working with the members of Congress and Senate, and the United States is always supporting.